With me, Frank Ackermann, who'll be talking about cannot see the woods for the trees, too many security standards for automation industry. Large round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, I would like to thank DeepSec for inviting me in, and you have seen a lot of talks, and when you liked the talks and liked the conference, give applause to the team, give applause to the DeepSec crew, because I think it's an awesome conference. That's actually some working place of mine in my new company. And who of you is working in the OT environment? 2, somehow, 3. So most for you, this topic is quite new, and I think that's quite valuable to stay here because standards are not the greatest thing. You have to work through sometimes a lot of paperwork, but you have to think about what the standards are for, what's the benefit, and that's actually the intention of the talk, to think about why are standards, what is valuable in that, and I come to the point where I've also picked the topic, cannot see the tree for words. I'm heading automation security for my new company starting this year. I'm working in OT, IT, and information security since over 17 years. So security is quite something in my DNA. I really like this topic. I had a couple of talks in diverse conferences. I think this is the second or third time I'm doing a talk here in DeepSec, and also certified in some things, and continuing doing that, because I think security certification doesn't mean you know something about security, but when you speak with the customers or speak with somebody else, they understand, hey, this person is quite educated. So it's valuable doing that. Now they're coming this 50 sides of what the company is doing. Actually, my company is, one thing is doing control systems. So when you think about how to control and manage, for example, an OT plant, a chemistry plant, an oil plant or something, you have to control it. And mostly this is done by IT equipment with special software. That's one point we're doing. We're also doing energy efficiency management, so analyzing the plant situation, the power plant usage, or process optimization in the industrial industry. To give you more understanding where we are, this is actually some places where installations are, how installations look like. So it's not only an oil plant, but it can also be in the chemistry. It can be in the old style kind of control room. It can be also in the German word is Raffinerie, like where you produce from the make out of raw oil the individual potential products and things for further chemistry products, or also for medicine. So you have a lot of installations there which steer and control pumps, pressure, analyze for example, the water consistency, the pH, something which is valuable to understand how the information works, how the plant works. That's the story, and that's the only slide I have in German, but the text, everything is in English. So it's increasing, it's working together, it's getting more. From the old Industry 3.0, now we're coming to the Industry 4.0. What does it mean? It means that the OT world, like the operational technology world from the plant, and the IT world, like the standard office networks, like the customer relationship management systems, they're growing together, because the plants are anywhere. They're in Russia, they're whatever, in South America, they're in Africa, and the headquarters, for example, anywhere in Germany, anywhere in Austria. And they would like to see in time, in real time, what information, how the plant is currently doing, how the health status of this plant is. So what they're doing, they're going to do information exchange. They're drawing, for example, details out of the plant, to analyze it, to make it more sharp, to, for example, increase the productivity by 1%. Another thing is, and that's especially in the OT environment for sure, Industry 4.0 and digitalization reduces costs. In the old days, in the really old days, some people went to a pump and turned it off. And then it came to a little more that the process automation came into, that the people started to have little systems or small computers to kind of change things in the environment, change things into the plants. And that's nowadays, when you're moving forward into digitalization, analyzing this information, you kind of do more quickly without less people. So you reduce costs. You can do it more precise because it's not only that you turn on the wolf by whatever 10% or 1 millimeter, you can do it precisely every time the same. And so you're going to measure and also to manage the plant very, very good. Another thing is the separated networks growing together. What does it mean? In the old days, they call it air-gapped networks, which means that the plant was completely not having any connections outside. So you have to be inside the infrastructure to get access to the network, to get access to the systems. Nowadays, they connected together. Speaking about this digitalization, Industry 4.0, so that's actually something. And what I think is, and that's also very valuable, is, or that's a point to mention, is that the OT environment information are increases in value. What does it mean in particular? And it means, for example, on the right corner, you have an analysis or actually a spectrogram to describe what the normal standard situation of a plant is. And then you can identify based on information if something goes wrong, or for example, if a pump pressure or a temperature goes in the direction which is not normal. And this abnormality can actually go into a way for cause an incident, cause a problem, cause something with damage. The lower left is it's actually a picture, we already know that. It's about security information analysis, it's about cryptolog or something. I just picked a picture because this analysis from the upper right goes sooner or later, and that information, what you have in the plant, like that you not only understand one piece of the puzzle, you can also understand and compare the individual things of the plants. Why is security also a part and very valuable to think about in the OT world? In the World Economic Forum Risk Report, which is a quite interesting paper to read or to step through, in the upper right, which is the high impact, high likelihood square, there are also cyber attacks and data fraud and theft as a topic. And this is not only in the IT world, but this is also in the OT world. So for example, when you take a producer like Coca-Cola, and they're doing a lot of liquid, a lot of consumer products, they don't want to give out the recipe. What is the recipe actually? The recipe is a mixture of individual substances. So it's not only about that they care about that the plant can or may cause, in case of an incident, a failure and, for example, produce death or produce a problem for the environment, but also when you hack into the systems and read out the wolves and the information out of the mixing system, you can get indirectly the information about the recipe. And that's something where Coca-Cola might be quite interested in protecting this information, and data theft or data fraud can be also affected by them. When I started working in this environment, and I was working in IT for a couple of years, then I jumped into this topic and said, okay, before I do something with the customer, before I think about what the next step could be concerning putting more security into automation, I first thought, okay, what kind of standards do we have? And the next thing is, what is actually valuable to pick, for example, to compare, to run security assessments, to do audits or whatever against? What kind of standards does the market want to have? And this actually brought me to this kind of little crazy topic, because there were so many standards. Coming to that in a second. And these standards are, for me, extremely important to make it comparable, to also define what is necessary to increase security in a certain environment. And speaking about having a closer look on the standards, this is only a small list of standards, and you can get the presentation afterwards if you want to. This is only a small list of standards, of industry standards, which are required when you work in the OT environment in Germany or German-speaking environment, or when you're especially working in the pharmacy, producing medicine or something else. And it was huge. And what I did, and also for discussion, I picked some of the standards out to give them a small discussion about it and then squeeze it together. Let's start with the one you already know. It's a 27000 standard. It's actually quite easy because it's a standard to specify an ISMS. This is what you know. It has a scope for privacy, it has confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this was also one of the major differences to what the OT people says. So the operational technology people working in the industry focus on safety. Safety for the plant, safety for the people, health insurance, number one. And they think about availability first. And this directly clashes with this standard because our standard first thinks about confidentiality, then integrity, and then availability. But in the end, thinking about digitalization, Industry 4.0, that's actually something we have to think it together. So you have to prioritize what is important, and that's why this standard might not always affect and complete the requirements of the OT environment. The standard itself gives a good understanding and a good guidance into setting up an ISMS and risk management. And of course, it clusters in diverse topics, but you already know that. The standard, I think, is quite good for using in diverse disciplines. And actually, the good thing here is it's finalized and you can get certified and audited against it. And for example, in Germany, we had to use this certification a lot for to fulfill the critical infrastructure law, and so the Germans had to kind of implement information security management equivalent to, for example, 27,000. So a lot of companies went for 27,000 implementation and also got a certification in that way. What this standard actually does not include is a procedure how to set it up. So a lot of companies who thought about, okay, we would like to be compliant to the standard, realized, oh, well, actually it gives a good description, but I had to turn on my head again and do not only to one-to-one implementation, but also kind of transfer the requirements into what the individual organization says. Another thing is that the individual OT, also the operational technology requirements in the environment, are not 100% met by this standard. So in fact, this standard doesn't really work well in the industry. The second standard, which I didn't know so far, was the 62443. That's actually what the most OT people say it's the standard for OT environment. So it does actually focus the industrial automation control system, and it does focus the protection of the environment, which is in the foreground. It's also a quite old standard. It came from the earlier version, ISA 99, and it was renamed, but it's still not final. And this standard actually adds into other requirements and descriptions, which are also kind of linked, and has 4 major topics, which is general policies, procedures, systems, and components. And that's a little bit the overview. And the interesting part, which is unfortunately not really visible, I had to point it out a bit more. Out of these complete topics, which are the sub-chapters of the standard, it's 1.1, which is published, 2.1, 2.3, 2.4, 3.1, 3.3, and 4.1. All the others, which are light gray here a bit, grayish, are not published so far. They're not final, and they cannot be certified so far. So however this idea is, it's not finished. And that's quite unfortunate, because when you speak, for example, to an OT provider or somebody who's running a plant, you can discuss with him that this standard is quite valuable, but on the other side, he can say, well, it's not a final standard. One thing which is also interesting to mention is this standard gives a reference, or a very high-level reference architecture, and building up 4/5 layers where to put the individual instruments and the control system in place, and to implement segregations. And also this standard levels up or defines security levels where, for example, put segregations and security measures into the individual network, which is quite nice. The benefit here is that this standard focuses, of course, the OT and especially also the control system, and it provides guidance for the maintenance. So it's not only a standard for describing yada yada control and you can do a compliance check, but it gives also really good explanation, for example, the patch management. Itself, when it's done and final, it's consistent. And it can also be consistent and reused and combined with other standards, which is also quite nice and which comes in the very summary. One part of the standard, one part is that currently the standard is not completely final. And when it's not completely final, you can only parts do the certification, which is not so great. And another negative point of this standard, and this is also quite pushback from a lot of customers and pushback from a lot of other companies, is that the risk management and the risk assessment is extremely academic. It's really directly coming from the university, but you cannot do anything. So other risk management systems are extremely easy there. Another standard which is quite interesting and can be used also for the IT environment is what the German government did. So the German Federal Office of Information Security, BSI, they decided to describe security measurements in another way, not 27000, but also in a, let's say, more practical way to also address it to smaller companies, which is quite nice. And they focus on private sector, including smaller companies, which is good. And they give guidance on how to implement it, and which is compatible to 27000 standard itself. So you might know it, but I just stepped through it briefly. It splits up into current 3 parts, and also the risk management is quite interesting to have a look at it, because also the method there is quite good described. And the nice thing also for this audience is that this standard is also freely available and in English as well. The standard here has pragmatic and easy to use explanations, and I think this is also a benefit. So when you're not having a clue, especially in a smaller company, and would like to implement a security management system, it's worth to have a look at that. And it also gives you an understanding to identify a baseline of minimum security requirements you should consider. And somehow it considers also industrial control systems and OT in the OT environment. But on the other side, sometimes the wording is a little bit too specific for IT. So they sometimes mention that also in OT, a security manager should be in place, but sometimes they completely forgot it. And even when you implement this standard as 100% or like 100%, you cannot do this for 100% 27000 recommendation. Another standard, actually it's not a standard, it's a recommendation. There's a user association in this industry where a lot of vendors and customers are working together on this recommendation. And this is a guidance. It's something to offer understanding how security works and how security, which kind of recommendations you should give, especially in design, implementation, operation of not automation industry, but industrial automation system. And this standard and recommendation also refers to the other ones. So it's a kind of a mix-max between a standard, like really to be certified in a standard, and also a recommendation. This standard or recommendation actually splits up in also different parts and focused here, and that's the first time I have read it, security by default, security by design, security by implementation, and security in development, which is lovely because it describes not only for the vendors but also for the users which step you should consider in a very high level to make security happen. And also for the IT people, this is something not new, but for the OT people it is. The recommendation here, they're quite simple and usable for the vendors and for the operators. They're available in German and English, which is also quite good, but it's not a standard. It's a recommendation, so you can follow it or not follow it. So even when you're following it, doesn't mean you're 100% secure. In some parts, it's extremely generic. So they describe in a very, very high level what they would like to achieve concerning security. So you have to put a lot of effort to go from this recommendation to this okay, we do that and that, do a segregated firewall here, a segregated network here, using firewalls, using that type or whatever. It does not cover operation and maintenance of an ESES. So, so you have a very generic description, but sometimes where it really goes into trouble, for example, give guidance to the operators not to do that, not to do that, this recommendation doesn't work for. Another framework which you might know is the NIST security framework, which I think it's also quite nice because it's a policy framework and it gives a lot of explanation and understanding about managing risks and therefore also managing incidents. It's from the US-driven national standard. It's a framework supporting in diverse areas, and it's also applicable not only for the governance, it's also for the private sector. It was renewed beginning of this year, and the new version is also worth looking at it. So you go to the website, just download the complete package. You get a lot of information, and they have a couple of benefits, which I'm going to show in one or two slides. What they're using is a kind of a continuous improvement process as a standard description that they first identified, protected, detected, responded, and recover it. And this is what they're ongoingly discuss it in the framework. And when you once use this kind of KPI thing or measure it via KPI, then you're can measure also the increasing then you can continuously measure it and also identify if you're increasing your security in your implementation. A little closer look into how the standard is. These are the subtopics described in this individual framework, and when you have, especially when you're starting implementing security in your small, for example, plant or in your small OT company, that would be also a good idea to set up policies. Because when you have no clue at all, it's good to think about, okay, shall we have a policy or a procedure concerning asset management? What about business environment? What about protection and maintenance? So I think this framework has this one good step for maintaining and setting it up. Another thing, I think that's also extremely good work. When you have a closer look into what they offer in the complete framework package, is they do references. Though that's not normal. So what they do is, what you see here, for example, it's COVID. They do the 62 standard. They do also the 27,000 standard and NIST. It's a real good package to see when I'm implementing this. Is it, for example, described in another standard? Does it meet this standard? It doesn't really cross-compile, so you cannot 100% match when you do everything from the NIST framework that you match everything from the other standards. And it's not vice versa that, for example, you can follow the 27,000 standard requirements and match it directly into what NIST says. But it gives you at least an understanding that this idea is not only described here to implement it as a security measure or as a requirement, but it's also mentioned in other standards so you can refer it and verify it. The NIST standard actually, the idea is to improve, and but on the other side, which I mentioned earlier, it's not covering everything of other standards. So for example, which means also that it's not really an underlying for a good certification base, or you cannot do, for example, implement a complete NIST framework, and then in the end go to a certification institution and say, okay, I would like to certify against the 27,000 standard. What I liked in this standard, and I really appreciated that they did the work, is they provide actually a systematic approach and systematic methodology to manage it, to start things, keep going, having this process circle to bring this risk management and also a little bit incident management into it. For me, I think it helps a lot to guide decisions and action items. So when you do not have a clue currently because you've never done incident and risk management before, that's one framework to go. And it contains this reference table, which is, I think, it's more than valuable to sit through and work through and sit over and think about, okay, what actually does it work and what not. The negative point here is that it's not a standard itself. So You can do it, you can not do it, so it's nothing you get requested for, but it's more like a helping line, a red line to fulfill and make more security. And another thing which is kind of interesting, this framework says they're focusing on risks, but on the other side they have no procedure on measure it. Something which is also coming from the US, also interesting, is this CIP, Critical Infrastructure Protection. It's something coming out of a US directive, and it's equivalent to what the EU also does. The European Program for Critical Infrastructure Protection is the starting point for the later ongoing EU NIS. Talking about it later. And also this NIS directive brought up, for example, in Germany, the Critical Infrastructure IT law. The CIP focuses on diverse sectors, and one, for example, which I also had the possibility to look at in my further company, was the NERC-CIP, which is the let's say specifically compliance-driven requirement for power companies in the US. But they're also focusing on other critical infrastructures, like, for example, fire departments or public work, like transportation. The NERC or the CIP itself, it's very individual in the regulation, and they sometimes have very specific requirements on what to do in which sector. And the good thing there, I think, it's mandatory to implement. So they have to do it, they have to fulfill, and have to comply. But on the other side, this sometimes goes into the way that they're running an internal control system only, that they do compliance tests. They build up small controls, which are equivalent to what the CIP standard says. Then they do a checklist and say, okay, we did this, check, done. So it's not really improving security at all. It's more like for pushing it. And the OT environment itself not always in focus. So it says sometimes it goes into the specific sector, but the requirement itself sometimes are extremely high level or very IT driven. Mentioned also earlier, European NIS directive is something which came out of the European, let's say, governance, was valid in August 2016, and in Germany, for example, and other European countries, they have to comply and implement the law by May 2018. The intention is that the EU requests from their member to do proactive activities to prevent critical infrastructure against incidents. The focus is very equivalent to what the CIP says. They're focusing on the public life to protect it, to protect against issues in the for infrastructure sectors were defined, which were defined earlier in this law. And this risk incident management is a little bit the core of that. And the law, and that's something where sometimes the branches or the vendors go into different directions. Some they say it's good, they have to report incidents. On the other side, it's not. So it's something where it's put it up. It's a binding regulation, and this might lead to compliance penalties. This might be a good thing, but on the other side, it put pressure on the industry, so sometimes the hurdle can be high or low. It's quite generic, so really, you have to work through, think about if this standard, this law is really going to meet your own requirements, think about it, and well, the requirements in critical infrastructure and OT environment is sometimes vague or not in detail. Enough for the standards, because this is quite boring. So what's actually the problem? What's actually the thing why I did this course and why I thought about having this as a talk? Standards are sometimes a pain, but they also have possibilities and things to improve things, especially we have a common understanding, a common definition. You can do comparability, like you can compare the individual solutions, the individual measures you implement towards, is it working in this standard, is it working in that standard, or when somebody is talking, hey, I'm equivalent or I'm certified in 27,000, then you can compare, okay, this requirement is the same, so how did you actually implement this as a measure? It can increase the homogeneous implementation, and especially in the OT world, it's like a plant is not like in the OT, it's running for a couple of years and you deinstall it and then you build something new. A plant, for example, an oil plant or power plant, they build it and they keep it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years running. Sometimes it's only once every 5 or 7 years they're doing an audit, so they ramp it down and check everything through. And this is also the time where the IT people have the possibility to do something new. So that's the situation on site. And when you have this, and when you have this understanding, and some companies buy a lot of plants together into the big pocket, sometimes one plant is 5 years old, another plant is 15 years old, another is 20 or 25 years old. So this, or actually a standard, can help to bring these things together, to define what the minimum level is, to define what the minimum standard is. And actually it gives a basis in this explicit requirements, so that the people can describe what they would like to have in certain security understanding or security levels, especially when they ask for example, when they ask a vendor, please produce me something or install me a system, or like we get requirements on a control system. And one example is here, and that's really original, translated from German and English. It's really nothing. So when you get as a vendor this requirement on security or automation security or cybersecurity, you just wonder, well, dear customer, maybe we should sit together and speak about security because this is not a requirement. So as a vendor, you can be happy to say, well, thank you for this requirement. We can do something or nothing or everything. Or vice versa, you can ask the customer, well, perhaps we should work together and specify what your real requirements are. So what's actually, what standard should we now take? What is actually the thing? And I like this picture a lot, and I think I had it first seen 10 years ago or something. Somebody else spoke about security. So what we see here? We see a couple of Indians and we see some settlers. So after 1492, America was discovered, then the military came, flattened something up, and then the settlers came. The settlers were foreigners and they would like to intrude into a foreign country and get something out of the Holy Grail and gold. And the ones who originally lived there and owned the land were not really happy. So they fought against it. So the Indians are actually the ones, they know their territory. They know where to attack. They know what's the best way to attack. They especially know what they wanted to have. So they know in this settlers group, they have water, they had gold, they had women, they had horses, they had something, they had weapons, they had alcohol, they had everything. But the Indians are the ones who said, okay, now we're going for the gold, or now we're going for the water, or we're now going for the horses. But the settlers had no clue, so they were traveling around trying to find a nice piece of land close to a river, and they had no clue what to protect when the Indians came up. And that's actually what this picture is starting what I want to do to think about is what's actually the valuable thing to protect. Because when the settler would have known that, for example, these Indians are going for the firewater or for whatever, the gold or something, or the horses, they would exclude this out of the circle and said, here, leave our lives, leave our food, please take the horses, have fun. This would be quite better and more secure for the settlers and easier for the Indians. So the settlers tried to protect everything, the Indians were specifically attacking something. And that's something where the recommendation also goes why standards are valuable, especially what way to go. Because when you have no clue about what to protect, why you need a standard, how to use the standard, the first thing is, identify your core business and identify the essential product processes. And in the OT world, it's like you have not only a business you run, this business sometimes is displayed in individual parts of your process industry. So you, for example, get material, you start processing it. This material is going to, for example, go to a refinery. Some add-ons are coming in, and then at the end you're going to have the final product which is going to be transported. And each business process and this individual OT or plant installation has its individual value. And also especially the individual value concerning confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So sometimes a delay in the process can cost you really money. So availability and the process should be going on is quite valuable. Or the example of Coca-Cola, protecting the recipe is also something. So you have to first think about what is really valuable, speaking about the Indians and the settlers, and when you did it, then you can say, okay, that's the very specific part, and here, for example, you can kind of push the button to make more secure, to bring the security in. Then the second is no legal requirements. When you've done your business impact analysis, risk analysis, you also should ask for, do you have a risk register? Do you have a legal register? Which kind of information should we consider? Is there something for compliance we really need to do? And consider if you already have internal regulations or policies, if these ones work. In the most company in the OT world, I've seen a lot of policies coming from the IT, but this doesn't work. For example, when in the IT world we say patch at least once a week, whatever, patch Tuesday or something, we know what the normal processes are. In the OT, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes there is no possibility to access this machine within 1 week. Sometimes not possible within 1 month, because it's anywhere in Siberia and Russia, and you cannot just go there with a disk and say, okay, here's the new patch. When you would like to implement the industry standard, and whatever you pick, like the 62 standard or 27,000, when you want to do it and really want to do it, get backup from senior management. It's unbelievable bad to say or to decide individually out of your small part of the company, while we do industry standard, we're going to fulfill it and request also our vendors to fulfill the standard by not getting backed up, because sometimes the standard can cost some pretty penny, and on the other side, it cannot really increase security because the people are misled by the standard itself, but not the implementation. Define, adjust, and implement the reference architecture. This is also quite interesting, especially when you have different diverse installations, which is in the normal IT world quite easy. You have one big plug and you define it, and this network's going like this, or this, the networks are just quite standardly set it up. In the OT world, it's different because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the people bought OT installations or industry plans from diverse ages, and the installations and the control systems are also from diverse ages. So when you would like to make security happen and also bring people into a standard, define the reference architecture and define which kind of levels to protect. Define also the security minimum requirements. As I mentioned, also this request from the customer, when they had understood that security requirements are extremely valuable for setting it up, they should have had expressed it. Like, for example, the 62 standard offers 4 layers in security, and when they have said, for example, please fulfill or implement a security, implement and control system which meets security level 2, that would be helpful, because then you can go to a reference and see, okay, what's the minimum description of the standard level 2, then you implement it, and then you're equal to the standard and actually at least have some security implementation there. And also this is very similar to what what's typical in the IT world. Express the requirements extremely early. So you know that the later security comes into a project, the more it costs. It's the same in the OT world, but now we're not speaking only about some IT projects and small applications. Now we're talking about big planned installations. Like, for example, you have this big oil refinery thing directly at the airport, something like that. Huge installation. So better speak before about security and your requirements before implementing and then later on putting it up. Very last, and these are the possible warranties where I see could be a benefit for individual customers or individual companies. For smaller companies, I think there are a couple of recommendations which is a good mix, like this NAMR which I mentioned, or this NEST framework, which gives them an introduction into what security can be, what security is valuable to put in and to think about, because sometimes the smaller companies, also the talk earlier was expressing it, the smaller companies do not have this understanding to, for example, implement security in a whole. Bigger companies, and also you might know that, they're willing to, for example, go for a standard like 27,000. And 27,000 gives a good overhaul, well, a general in setting up the security management, but you need also additional security information or specific requirements as a standard for this industry-specific thing like the OT. And this is why I draw this small triangle to also put the 27,000 on top for the management aspects and the technical aspects and specifications in the 62 standard. That was all for me. And thank you for your time. Thank you for your attendance. Any questions before?
There's about 5 minutes left for us before the last talk, so fire ahead with if you have any questions. Seems they're already researching, so in that case, you get a head start if you stay here after the last talk, because closing will also be here. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll continue here in a few minutes with manipulating human memory for fun and profit.